Privatization Universalized. A priori apologetics is metaphysical, analytical and spiritual. It does not have physicality, nor is it composed of a physical substance. It is a creation of the mind and is therefore, not of this, meaning, physical world. Because a priori is logic manifest, its existence is dependent entirely on the cohesiveness of its arguments. One error and the entire edifice is destroyed. A priorists believe that knowledge rests upon principles that are self-evident to reason, or axioms. If knowledge rests upon reason, then reality is information. The only system that rests on reason, and in fact, faith, is Christianity. Christianity is the only possible source of information about reality because Christianity rests on faith. Ultimately, this is all information is, it is the encapsulation and expression of faith. If we did not believe 2 + 2 = 4, it would not be information. It is impossible to have this kind of analytical faith in the state or in any power that relies on force to maintain its legitimacy. The Church is not a thing, it is an association based on faith. It is coherency manifest. The market is a corollary of the Church and is sufficient to solve all social problems. The state is the source of the 10 great evils. The Church is the antithesis of the state. A priorists, those who apply logic in the pursuit of truth, use the mechanisms of the market, in conformity with Scripture, to eliminate the 10 great evils. The 10 great evils are unemployment, debt, poverty, inflation, pollution, waste, taxation, homelessness, war and crime. These costs are all created and justified by the state. Supply and demand are the only tools permitted in a market, and the only feature an a priorist needs to eliminate the state and its social costs. Social costs are the symptoms of a state's social agenda. A priorian has developed a set of policies and protocols that systematically eliminate freeloading by means of market mechanisms. To implement these protocols, a priorists work together as a social club. We exist to help the victims of the state to escape from dependency on the state. People can live free of the state if they choose logic over emotion. A priorian apologetics is a religious order or movement formed till the Great Commission. Our goal is to create fully privatized jurisdictions under the control of the logical minds of the Apologetics Church. Our mission is to eliminate the state in order to fulfill the Great Commission. Our secondary or congruent objective is to build the Church as a fruit of faith. Below we list the 10 great evils and a summary of how to eliminate them. The end of unemployment. A priorian guarantees, removing the state will end the scourge of unemployment. In time the program will eliminate unemployment entirely, but to compensate for any imprecision in the measure of unemployment or unforeseen influences, the elimination of unemployment is defined as a rate of unemployment below the 1% level. Jobs are created when equity is added to assets. This activity is known as specialization. The higher the intensity of specialized work, the more equity that is added to the world's assets. Civilization is a measure of the level of specialization in a jurisdiction. Equity is measured by a unit that tracks the amount of labor added to assets. The end of debt. Debt is a loss of equity. All debt results in a transfer of equity from those who created it, to those who consume it. It does not matter who created the debt or how it originated. Conventional forms of money only exist, to the degree they permit the expropriation of equity from those who originated it. Think of it this way. You add value to a stone. Someone wishes to purchase the new product. There are only 2 options, though one is split into 2 ways of stealing equity from its creator. The product can be bartered, possibly using an intermediatory digital good, known as money, or it is taken, and a debt created. This is done directly by stealing, or indirectly by means of an agent, usually, the state. In the a priorian system all purchases are paid for by the final consumer. The end of poverty. It is said that poverty is relative. One does not know they are poor until they see someone who is rich. But this cannot be entirely true. If poverty was subjective and no one had an intrinsic sense of being poor, complacency would be universal and none of us would have a sense of needing more and indeed better. Because poverty, despite what some seem to think, is not a simple matter of wanting more, it is a desire for better. There is only one method of civilizing society and that is through specialization. We each have to take personal responsibility for doing something supremely well. The end of inflation. Inflation is a measure of the rate and volume of free loading which is directly correlated with the power of the state. This is also tied to the level of debt. All inflation is a transfer of value from labor. The mission of a priori missions is to reverse and eliminate inflation and eliminate the formation of usage and need for debt. The end of pollution. Pollution is just one more way people avoid the costs of their activities. The role of the church is to hold people accountable for the costs they create, including the cost of pollution. This includes anything from graffiti to oil spills. Ending pollution is easy because it is something that is cheaper to halt than clean up. By using the labor theory of value, tied to and a unit of account that measures equity, accountability is assured. Every action occupies a span of time and time is easily measured. If your actions cause someone to expend an hour of time, then that person's account is credited an hour's worth of labor and your account is debited the same amount. It is that simple. The end of waste. The end of waste is the same as the end of pollution. But waste generally applies to the things that belong to God. We all have access to nature, but no one has a right to waste what belongs to God. The problem is, we cannot have a state unless we reject God. The state becomes God and, for all intents and purposes, replaces God. In the grand scheme of things there are only two paths, and each is the antithesis of the other. There is no room for any other way of seeing things. A choice is either part of the truth or another lie. We can only do what is right or what is wrong. Those are the options. There are not different truths for different persons, that is just a lie. Either everything is relative, and we can own or claim whatever we wish to claim, or there is an absolute truth and ownership is tied to an objective state of affairs. If we can own anything, what can we own more fully than what we waste? Waste is intrinsically ours. But if everything we do, good and bad, is put on our account, waste no longer exists, because it is the creator of the action that pays for the action. Waste only exists when the cost of the action is externalized onto society and future generations. The end of taxation. It is a common saying that only death and taxation is certain. But that is a truth that applies to only one reality, and that reality contains the state. The state is a bad actor. The state borrows money, under duress, to buy things it wants even if in our name. This is a cover for all of the things it wants for itself but cannot buy because the state has no source of income. The state does not build a house, road, school, hospital or any other thing. It contracts out the work to private entities using funds it borrowed from private entities or skimming currency using inflation. The state is a classical criminal enterprise that exists only because of its size. Taxation can be ended if we understand privatization does not operate at the personal level when dealing with commercial property. Individuals can own personal property but not commercial property. This falls under the jurisdiction of the relevant sector. The trades own property relating to the trades. The medical sector owns the assets attached to the health sector, and so on. The medical sector provides medical services, the construction sector builds structures. Each sector pays individual employees for the work done and charges the client at the level at which the client operates. If the buyer is an individual, the individual is invoiced. If the client is a buyer who operates at the national level, for example in the purchase of a highway, the sector is invoiced at that level. The education sector can purchase schools from the construction sector as easily as it buys books from the industrial sector. Taxes are never needed. The relevant businesses buy from each other without the need for a state acting as a broker. The end of homelessness. Homelessness, poverty and all social agendas exist because people do not earn an adequate wage. If everyone has a job and everyone is paid a living wage, there are no need of any social programs, nor will there be homelessness, hunger or any other social need. If there was no state, there would be no benefit to having people unemployed. The nation does not benefit from unemployment. There is always something to do in a nation and no one wants to work to support someone who is idle. If everyone works at a living wage, homelessness will no longer exist. The end of war. The state cannot end war and so claims it is impossible to end war. It is easy to end wars because they are so expensive and destructive it only requires, we cease funding them. That is very, very easy if there is no state. What is more, without the state there is no need for wars, because it is only the state that benefits from war. The end of crime. The end of crime is not about the employment of law to defeat the lawless. The idea is something of a paradox in that the more one utilizes law to fight lawlessness, the more law one needs, the more lawlessness one invariably creates. The law introduces the problem of origination, implementation or enforcement and adjudication. Who writes the law and oversees its enforcement? This requires an entirely new subset of laws. And creates an entirely new set of ways one can be made into a criminal. Without the law there are no crimes. In short, law cannot end crime. The law creates criminals. A new approach is needed.